In this quick video series, I want to talk about common backend problems that you might stumble upon and how to identify and solve them, of course. So imagine the following use case. Imagine we have a user who's trying to log in into our dashboard. So right after logging in, they land on our dashboard, but they experience slowness, meaning they see this loading spinner for a very long time. And we, of course, notice it as the administrator. What happens in the background is that our backend that's sitting behind the dashboard is trying to fetch some transaction data from our payment provider. It can be a bank API, it can be Stripe. So in our application, we want to show all of those transactions in a list so that the user can see like what has been happening over the last month, all right? And as soon as we fetch those data, for legal reasons, we want to save them in our own database as well. So this is what's happening. And while this is happening, we see this loading spin. So what might be your first thought as an engineer who's trying to debug this? Well, let me tell you something, which is as soon as you see this kind of slowness, it's usually related to either high CPU usage or high memory consumption, usually, but not always. And let's take a look at our telemetry. Hopefully you have one set up. And as soon as we look at the CPU and memory usage of the host, which is the, let's say, an EC2 instance in our case, we see that, yeah, there has been a spike in both CPU and memory usages, but it's still moderate, meaning it's not even reaching 30%. And then we also want to look at the telemetry of our database because we are doing this, we are fetching all of that transaction data as a bulk, so a lot of rows, and trying to insert them into our database, while at the same time trying to fetch the data that has already been there. All right. So what's happening is we see that there's a huge spike in the CPU of the database. So what does it indicate? It indicates that the bottleneck is actually somewhere here. All right. So what happens is, since the payment provider gives us a huge chunk of data, one bulky chunk of data that we need to insert into the database, there's something called a deadlock on our database table. So while we're inserting this huge amount of data, we are having problems reading the data from the same table. And this is a very usual case that you might encounter whenever you're dealing with big data. So the first thing that comes to my mind, and this is probably the right thing to do in order to solve this issue, is to introduce a queue, something like an RabbitMQ between the database and your backend, so that this transaction or this big chunk of transaction is not inserted in the database at once, but rather sent into the queue first, and then the queue is kind of dividing that huge chunk into smaller chunks and then saves them into the database instead, meaning we still have some processing time to fetch the data from the database. So this is a quick video to just explain one of the common problems that happen. If you liked it, smash like down below and subscribe for more videos like this. And I will see you in the next one.